Hello, and today I will be investigating the causative relationship between hyperinsulinemia and pancreatic cancer. So for starters, here's a little about me. My name is Anna Broderdorf, and my mentor for this project was Natalie DeForest, who has been super helpful and wonderful in explaining all these biological processes and helping me organize my research. A few more things about me. I am a junior in high school currently. I live right outside of Washington, D.C. in McLean, Virginia, so I attend McLean High School. And in my free time, I really like chemistry, and I also row, so I actually tutor chemistry at my school now for honors chem students, and I get to row on the Potomac in DC, which is really cool. And my intended major outside of high school is biochemistry on a pre-med track. Okay, let's get back to the presentation. So why is pancreatic cancer even relevant right now? Well, according to a recent study, pancreatic cancer is projected to become one of the leading causes of cancer death by 2030. This is due to the extremely poor prognosis of the disease. Specifically PDAC, which is pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, which encompasses about 90% of pancreatic cancer cases, has a 5-year survival rate of roughly 10%. This means that only 1 in 10 people diagnosed with this condition will live 5 years. So due to this extremely poor survival rate, it's important to prioritize methods of prevention and analyze risk factors. One of these risk factors is hyperinsulinemia. Hyperinsulinemia is defined as the presence of elevated levels of insulin in the body as a result of insulin resistance. And here's some more background on it. So hyperinsulinemia has been under-researched and is actually relatively newly realized as a risk factor for pancreatic cancer. Some of the main causes of hyperinsulinemia include hypertension, which is a blood pressure of anything over 140/90 millimeters of mercury, and is present in about 1.28 billion people globally. Visceral fat, which is the fat that lines your abdominal walls and organs, and this is usually very protective, but when it's present in excess, it can pose a problem. And obesity, which is present in about 16% of the population globally. So now that you have that background, let's explore this connection between hyperinsulinemia and pancreatic cancer. So a recent study published in the National Library of Medicine found that participants with the highest insulin levels had a 60% increased risk of pancreatic cancer. Moreover, a Korean study that examined over 500,000 adults found a almost 50% increase in pancreatic cancer risk in participants with insulin levels in the top 25%. So this connection is very, very well established between hyperinsulinemia and pancreatic cancer, but we don't really know how these conditions progress from one to the other. So that brings us to the goal of this presentation, which is to present a possible chain of events shedding light on how hyperinsulinemia progresses into pancreatic cancer. And this chain of events progresses as follows. Hyperinsulinemia to the premature pancreatic digestive enzyme activation into chronic pancreatitis, and finally pancreatic cancer. So the biggest new discovery in this chain of events is the link between hyperinsulinemia and the premature pancreatic digestive enzyme activation, because this was actually asserted with strong empirical evidence in 2024. So this is very, very new, but the link between digestive enzyme activation and chronic pancreatitis, as well as the link between chronic pancreatitis and pancreatic cancer, are very well established things. So let's explore this chain of events. With the first thing being hyperinsulinemia to the premature digestive enzyme activation. And the study that I just referenced, we'll go over in a second. But first, let's talk about what this even is. So digestive enzymes are produced in the pancreas, and their intended destination is the small intestines. They are produced by these things called acinar cells, and these enzymes could include things like protease, lipase, amylase, and these are all general broad enzyme categories. And they're intended to, again, break down things in the small intestines. But when they remain in the pancreas and they start to activate there, they can break down pancreatic tissue. This is especially harmful with things like protease enzymes because they're really strong. So this leads to a lot of pancreatic damage. So let's explore how hyperinsulinemia connects to this. So hyperinsulinemia causes large amounts of insulin to bind with the acinar cell's insulin receptors. This triggers the release of insulin and leads to the overproduction and early activation, release of enzymes, and leads to the overproduction and early activation of these enzymes. And the study that I was talking about, it found that insulin binding with insulin receptors triggered these enzymes, and this was a kind of a theoretical conclusion, but it was not established yet. And so this study really helped establish this. And the key hallmark of it was that these researchers found that by removing these insulin receptors, they reduced precancerous pannin lesions by 70 to 80%. And this strongly supports the conclusion that the insulin is what triggers the release of these enzymes. So you can see how having too much of that insulin would lead to the production of too many of these enzymes. Okay, and this brings us to the next stage, which is these digestive enzyme activation into chronic pancreatitis. So chronic pancreatitis is essentially the presence of long-standing inflammation and like persistent cases of acute pancreatitis. And due to digestive enzymes breaking down in the pancreas, it causes a lot of damage. And so this inflammation, it can keep reoccurring, and it creates this chronic, persistent condition. So this brings us to our final connection, which is chronic pancreatitis into pancreatic cancer. So this is probably the most well-established connection, and this is pancreatitis is an extremely well-known risk factor for pancreatic cancer. And this can occur, pancreatitis can progress into pancreatic cancer through a variety of ways. And one of the main ways is with macrophages. So due to the inflammation in the pancreas, the body starts an immune response, and this releases M1 and M2 macrophages. The M1 macrophages are usually present during acute pancreatitis, which is smaller bursts of inflammation rather than the chronic one. And these M1 macrophages release pro-inflammatory cytokines, and this actually worsens inflammation. It's like kind of the opposite of the goal, and this triggers the M2 macrophages. And the M2 macrophages are really like the turning point that leads to cancer development. So these macrophages promote fibrosis and are anti-inflammatory. So that's a key distinction between the two. M1 macrophages are inflammatory, and M2 macrophages are anti-inflammatory. And how these lead into pancreatic cancer is these M2 macrophages can inhibit T cells, and these are the cells that prevent cancer growth, which leads to cancer proliferation because there's nothing regulating them anymore. Moreover, M2 macrophages can release vascular endothelial growth factors, which can simulate angiogenesis. And angiogenesis is the process of blood vessel formation, and this is how a lot of tumors gain nutrients like oxygen and other nutrients to further their own growth. So by stimulating this, it only worsens the tumor's effects. Another way is is when the two macrophages have synergistic effects, they can cause acinar to ductal metaplasia, or ADM. And this is essentially where acinar cells, as we discussed earlier, which produce these digestive enzymes, it's where they transform into duct-like cells which line the pancreas. And this is one of the first abnormalities that leads to these pannin lesions, which again are the precursors to pancreatic cancer. So this is one of the two ways in which macrophages mainly progress into pancreatic cancer. Okay, and then to conclude this presentation, the link between high insulin levels, or hyperinsulinemia, and pancreatic cancer is a very well-established and known concept. But the progression is something that needs to be studied further. So this progression could occur as follows: hyperinsulinemia to the premature digestive enzyme activation, to chronic pancreatitis, and finally into pancreatic cancer. And some key takeaways here are that the presented list can help provide clinicians with a better idea of which patients may be at a higher risk for pancreatic cancer, or how close they may be to actually developing the condition. And this is important because understanding these mechanisms behind the pathogenesis can allow for better treatment plans or interventions to be implemented. And this is really important as we look back on the stat from the beginning of the presentation, conveying how the prognosis is so terrible and how most people diagnosed with it will not survive 5 years. So it's really, really important to implement interventions before the development of pancreatic cancer. So looking at this list, clinicians can better monitor people at higher risks. Okay, thank you so much for listening to my presentation. That's all.
Thanks so much, Anna. A really great presentation. And I think it was cool to see your take on this compared to Elizabeth's work, right? And you're both studying pancreatic cancer, but kind of from different lenses, and how together they tell a really interesting story too. And I like the way that you kind of went through the potential sequence and kind of what is really clearly established so far, what isn't. That's really insightful for me. Really great. And so anybody else, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A. I want to kind of touch on that last kind of conclusion point that you were talking about. So what could some of these earlier interventions say this does shake out to be the actual path of disease progression and how people end up with pancreatic cancer? what are some of these kind of early interventions that could be done to help mitigate that?
Yeah, I think definitely treating acute pancreatitis would probably be the best idea I would have of an intervention because that is a condition that a lot of people do have, and it can become chronic. Sometimes it doesn't. But I think that treating that with like different like screenings and like understanding that if you have acute pancreatitis to like find the cause of it to kind of like mitigate it. But the big thing is probably figuring out what's causing the inflammation. I think like if you treat because digestive enzymes can be activated early through a number of means, not just hyperinsulinemia, right? And so I think figuring out why those are being activated and then like in the pancreas and then finding a way to stop that is like probably the best intervention strategy prior to pancreatic cancer. So I would probably say, yeah, treating the pancreatitis would be the best and most effective way to go about that.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know you shared your pre-med. Oh, we have another question first. Let's get there before that. What are some causes of acute pancreatitis?
Oh, okay. A big one is probably alcohol consumption. So
Mhm.
that's probably the most common, I would say, is like because it leads to a lot of inflammation. So I think like that is a really easy way to like obviously stop your acute pancreatitis is just to not like overconsume alcohol. But I would have to probably look further into more causes. But I definitely know that alcohol like consumption is a big one for that.
Yeah, interesting. Um, Great. What is next for you? I know you are interested in being pre-med. What do you want to take?
Yeah.
You want to take this work further? This type of work
Yeah,
specifically?
I initially had an interest in oncology, but I actually think this research thing, like in particular, has inspired me more into like metabolic disorders, right? So I really am interested in insulin. Because just everything about it, it's so interesting to me because I feel like we don't commonly think of, everyone thinks of high glucose as a problem, but no one thinks of high insulin as a problem, right? And so I think that's a really interesting thing to explore. I feel like all the effects of insulin are so like not studied, so like understudied, and I just under researched, and I feel like it's a really interesting area of medicine. So I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, really interesting. And I know it's like things like continuous glucose monitors are like becoming more popular as people
Hmm.
like understand their health holistically and stuff. So it seems really relevant to where kind of things are trending right
Hmm.
now too. Great. All
Yeah.
right. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Really appreciate it.